The Romans and the Jews at the time hated one another. So every so often, someone would come along like Bar Kokhba, son of a star, and say that they were the Messiah that had been promised to the Jewish people and raise an army against the Romans. And there was an entire movement of dedicated, skilled with knives fighters called zealots who were part of all this, as you pointed out. And it's notable that a lot of Jesus' followers were probably zealots or former zealots. Judas's last name, for example, is Iscariot, which means dagger man. So all of this was going on at the time, and Jesus very, very consciously used symbols like his riding the donkey or his appearing in certain places on certain days to make the statement, I am the promised Messiah against the oppressor. This was a trope in Jewish history going back to, I believe, the Akkadians. So what made Jesus distinct is that Jesus claimed to be a Messiah largely of peace, not entirely. I mean, he did say things like, he that has no sword, let him sell his cloak and buy one. I mean, there's a scene where, although I believe Peter gets chastised, Jesus and the apostles kick some Roman soldiers' asses, one of them gets their ear cut off. That was one situation where fighting was considered necessary. But Jesus' whole thing was that he was primarily the Messiah of peace. And I will say one thing. When you look at Jesus or at Martin Luther King or at Gandhi, we all have a certain sympathy, anyone who's been trained as a fighting man or woman, for the Barabbas character. Like, to hell with it. Let's fight it out and see who wins. But I'm sorry?
Like, Barabbas is a William Wallace character, like Braveheart, the movie.
Oh, yeah. William Wallace, Franz Fanon. I mean, here in America, you could look at Huey Lewis, all these Malcolm X, all these people are remembered, but they're remembered at a hell of a lot lower level than Jesus or Gandhi. So we actually find that when strong people say, I might be able to beat you in a fight, but instead of fighting, let's combine our talents and let's keep society moving forward. Those are the people, Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, that become legendary, King Arthur, and whose names really live on down through history, Jesus Christ, Gautama Buddha. So I think that the reality of the Jesus story is that was a temporary setback for the intelligent peacemaker. They chose the zealot bandit and they crucified the peacemaker. But 2,000 years later, we remember the peacemaker, and the zealot bandit has been so totally forgotten that most people now think of him as a gutter thief. So that to me is a long-term argument for peace. Like, the sword can beat the pen if you fight directly one against the other. But, I mean, if you use the pen to write a critique of the swordsman, that'll endure long after he's dead.
And, not to make it too political, but just to bring it back into contemporary headlines, President Trump talked about, we got to dominate the streets. We got to dominate the streets. So he's playing the playbook that's in the line of Barabbas. He's not a revolutionary in that sense, but he is a mirror figure of that, the old way of doing things, to be people that like Trump think of him as like a William Wallace taking on the forces of globalism and bureaucratic, deep state actors and so forth. So we, and Trump, in his mind, he thinks, I'm doing what I got to do. I've got to fight hard to beat these nasty, snarling, and there are ruthless people in D.C. doing awful, sickening, disgusting things that we've only seen the tip of the iceberg but to fight fire with fire, Trump thinks he's going to go down as a historical figure, but look at what you said. Jesus, I can assure you, 2,000 years after Jesus, 2 billion people worship his name all over the country. I can assure you 2,000 years after Trump, no one's going to worship Trump. You know what I'm saying? So history will still have Jesus followers 2,000 years from now.
Probably. Yeah, I mean...
So you see what I mean? Like, we think the great man, we think the swagger, the kick-ass guy, that's what we got to be. On either side, in any ideology. But Jesus' model shows that it's actually this radical nonviolence ethic that actually solves the problems in a transcendent way.
Well, I mean, the one caveat I will give there is we also pretty much remember Caesar, who is the guy who indirectly gave the orders to kill Jesus. I mean, so I think that
pizza doesn't have the same cachet as the Roman Catholic Church or any of those.
I think Julius Caesar is still one of the most honored and recognized men throughout history. I mean, the term Caesar is still the term for leader.
By getting sent by the crowd, though. I mean, I understand your point, though.
But no, I actually think that there are. So I think that this is actually a pretty complex picture. I'm somewhat sympathetic to. Now, Trump needs to get off Twitter to some extent. I think that a great many people would support Trump if he did the things that he threatens to do on social media like a gentleman, just kept it quiet, did some of that stuff. Barack Obama killed a hell of a lot of terrorists with drones. Every time he did it, his popularity would increase among Republicans, stay stable among Democrats. I don't think most people had a problem with that. Trump's brash, glaring, wearing a red tie that's a foot too long, personality irritates a lot of people. The reality is nonviolence works when you don't have to fight. The reality was that the Jews and the Romans did not have to fight. I mean, Israel was, as you might correct me, was a self-governing protectorate. The fighting was caused by clashes over minor things, like the appearance of Romans versus Jews in public, how they dressed, how their, quote-unquote, their women behaved. And in a situation where you don't absolutely have to fight, where you could build together, yes, nonviolence is the way to go. If you absolutely have to fight, obviously you should defend yourself. And I do think that when you're talking about Washington, D.C., where they burnt St. John's Cathedral, fire was started in the basement, first floor is wrecked. And in a leadership role, I would have sent in troops, and keeping this PG very effectively kept the peace. So I do sympathize with Trump. His boasting, snarling approach to that did any good, though. But sometimes you do have to fight. In general, though, you're right. Jesus is even better remembered than Caesar. So if you can get out of a political role doing as little fighting as possible, you've been successful. The military is not an end, it's a means. The goal of having an active, effective military is not to get your young men killed killing someone else's young men. It's to have that as a bargaining chip so that you can avoid war. And a lot of leaders don't understand that.
I understand the logic of it. It's just that, the way it ends up being used, we end up, in theory, it's supposed to be self-defense, but it ends up being, we're in 100-something countries. There's been $1 trillion overseas. We haven't declared war for decades and decades. It's a disaster. And that's because we're more interested in Barabbas than we are Jesus. It's like, oh, there's a country in Yemen. Saudi Arabia's paying us money. Let's go starve out the people. That'll work out well. We're on the side of Al-Qaeda. Who cares? Syria, Al-Qaeda's over there. ISIS, yeah, let's get on their side and get rid of Assad. That'd be nice to create chaos there. I'm sure Saudi Arabia would like that. It's just like, come on, what is this nihilistic foreign policy? And I think, Dr. Riley, that there's a connection between our nihilistic foreign policy, this military adventurism, and this nanny state at home, and the church and Christians being kind of complicit with going along with the status quo in a lot of years, that created this blowback on the streets with a bunch of nihilistic kids because they want justice, but they're nihilistic. And so they go to the church and they're like, okay, I want to go to the house of Jesus. Let's go to the house of Jesus. And you don't see Jesus anywhere there. You see as much Jesus in an average church as you see lions in a Lions Club. It's just not there. It's name only, right? But okay, whatever. There's no Jesus when you're saying Jesus says God desires mercy, not sacrifice. I don't understand how we make asterisks for that everywhere we go. Well, yeah, I'll give mercy, not sacrifice, when it comes to the guy trying to get the last dinner roll in the buffet. I'll let him have that roll instead of me. That's how I apply it. But what about it? What about your political world, right? Can you seriously call yourself a Christian and then use the police to implement laws against nonviolent choices, which is sacrifice, not mercy? So what we think we're doing is we think we're doing mercy. Because, we have to stop people from doing drugs. We have to protect them. They're stupid. They can't control themselves. We must control people's desires. We must control this nanny-state control freak impulse that we have. So we think we're doing mercy, but we're doing mercy via sacrifice. We're using force to do it. And it's just always going to blow back in our faces.
No, I guess I'm just not as pious as you are. I think, and I'm not saying that mockingly at all. One thing I would say out of this, actually, I absolutely agree with you that the role of the church ought to be the church. One of the aspects of a stable society is, for want of a better word, morality. Most people in leadership roles, as both you and I are to some extent, understand that morality may not be ultimate, and what Jesus or the Constitution said is obviously up to debate. That's why there's a Supreme Court, and you have rabbis and Jesuit priests and so on. But the general idea that for society to be successful on a day-to-day basis, you need people to be honorable and keep most of the rules is undisputed. And different institutions have different roles in making that happen. I would see the role of the church as being a moral check on somewhat amoral leaders like, me and almost everyone I know, directly presenting the teachings of Jesus and asking, how do those relate to the decisions that we're making? And in fact, a great deal of modern American Christianity, I didn't come on the show with the intention of critiquing Christianity, but if you look at prosperity gospel theology, for example, what's sometimes called imperial theology. If you look at liberation theology on the far left, it strikes me as being a lot of nonsense based around justifying political or economic positions rather than having much to do with what Jesus or Moses or St. Paul or, I mean, these people who left writings behind them actually said. So, yeah, that's an issue. But, I mean, you don't need to bring in religion into this to say some of these things. I mean, like, left and right should both want less stuff to be illegal. That would be a good starting point in terms of how do you stop cops from fighting with young kids.
But you have to bring in religion, because in the ancient world there was no difference between culture and religion and politics. Those were all synonyms. So when you're a political scientist, you're dealing in the realm of the sacred, because politics and government and religion are entwined deeply. We can say we've got fictions like separation of church and state, but the state itself is a religion in the way it enterprise. It wants worship. It wants admiration. You get goosebumps when the flag plays. I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. I'm saying it has religious, awe-inspiring aspects to it as an institution. So when we're talking about how should we use this institution that's supposed to bind us together, I mean, the Latin word for religion is to bind together. You know, it's the Latin root. So we have to deal with it.
It is, first of all, just a total dork aside, it is interesting to look at the Chinese characters of the old Latin words because they give you a real insight into human nature. Like the Chinese symbol for crisis translates to danger, opportunity, and the symbol for ambitious young man. So, I mean, if you have a crisis, there's some risk, there's some chance, and it is what you make of it. I mean, same thing with some of the Latin words. I mean, you break down the names of continents, they come to mean things like cow land or, you know, land of rage or whatever. But anyway, that's a total aside. No, there are tons of them, though. Yeah, like it's, I was just thinking of places like Boeotia. That's where I got cow land and land of rage. There are like 4 or 5 of those places. But, I mean, you understand a great deal about how people perceived the world through looking at the first formational languages. Even barbarian just means some bitch who can't talk right. It's the idea that someone's just saying bar, bar, bar when they're trying to passionately have a conversation with you because they don't speak the right language.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It can be devastating. There is a law firm in Tampa Bay that will keep you informed throughout the entire process. That law firm is Catania & Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania & Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims do not even realize that they can claim compensation for their loss until they talk to Catania & Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to CataniaCatania.com, award-winning over 28 years and family first. Catania & Catania, personal injury, auto accident, and motorcycle accident attorneys.
Mom always told us to eat our fruits and veggies. Well, there's no better way to keep Mom happy than to take Fortify Organic Blue-Green Superfood. Studies indicate people who consume the most fruits and veggies each day are the healthiest with the best improved immune system. This product was created and designed by board-certified Dr. Michael Lang. You know him from the program Ask the Doctor. During this viral pandemic crisis, Dr. Lang recommends eating 10 servings of organic fruits and veggies a day, but this may not be realistic. This product produced by Dr. Lang has developed one of the first all-organic, gluten-free, and FODMAP-free superfood. It's called Fortify Organic Blue-Green Superfood. It's simple to take. Drink 1 serving a day to get 12 different superfoods. It's compatible for people with IBS since it's FODMAP-free. Perfect for anyone who needs a fruit and vegetable boost. Right now, Fortify is offering 25% off the superfood product. Go to Fortify.com. That's Fortify.com. Use promo code RADIO and receive the 25% discount. Eat healthy. Be healthy. Fortify.com. Keeping America fit and healthy during this time of precautionary change.
And now, Easy Lift Movers is on the air, reminding all Americans to show support to the brave men and women of our U.S. military. Their bravery and tireless efforts should never go unnoticed. This salute is brought to you by Easy Lift Movers, serving the community with quality and pride. Call the pros today, 813-505-8474. That's 813-505-8474. Also, all troops and veterans will receive a 10% discount. That's Easy Lift Movers, proudly saluting our troops and veterans. They are professionals who care.
Homeowners, do you have trees that are dangerously close to your home that can do a lot of damage?
Oops.
Well, ABC 1-2 Tree offers experienced, fully insured professionals at honest, affordable prices. Their equipment is state-of-the-art. They use the safest practices in the industry. They have 5-star Google reviews. ABC 1-2 Tree only employs certified arborists. Call them at 727-522-8733. That's 727-522-8733. Or abc12tree.com.
I don't know. So for some reason, I've never looked that one up. Probably should. All these years, never even checked out the Chinese glyph for politics.
There's a stand-up comedian that say poly means many and tex means blood-sucking creatures. So many blood-sucking creatures. There's one. Let's go to the big story of the time. We've got a little bit of time left, but I wanted to kind of go back to the on-ground story. In your opinion, first of all, you're a Black American. Have you experienced systemic, white supremacy in your encounters with law enforcement, or working in the employment world, trying to get a job or develop a business, or just walk down a neighborhood and people say, "Hey"?
Of course not. No, I mean, and I don't think that if we're being honest, if you interview brothers outside the hypersensitive, miasma of a college campus, most people would say that they experience constant white supremacy in the 2020 United States. So, I mean, I've certainly experienced racism in my life. I mean, I've been called racial slurs and things like fist fights or arguments, maybe 4 or 5 times total. I'm, in addition to being Black, I'm a big bearded guy, have a bald head. There've probably been situations where doing things like trying to flag down a cab with a Black friend and an Italian-American friend in a Chicago club district at 3 a.m., I've experienced racial prejudice. I've also, frankly, obviously experienced affirmative action. Like, I was quite well qualified to go to law school, so I got into the school I would have gotten into anyway, but I got to go for free because I'm Black. So, I mean, many Black professionals would argue privately that these advantages outweigh the disadvantages of, systemic, existential, blah, blah, blah racism. But one of the things I talk about in the book that I wrote most recently, Taboo, is that there's an astonishing prevalence of these false narratives in middle-class African-American discourse and in the conversations we have with our quote-unquote woke white allies. So if you look, for example, at the Black Lives Matter movement, the Black Lives Matter movement is an entirely evidence-free movement to a remarkable extent. Let me ask you as a guest, by the way, how many unarmed Black men would you say the police killed last year in the United States?
I have no idea. I'm not good with numbers.
Would you estimate like thousands?
Yeah, if you were going to go by the media narrative.
Okay, yeah, that's standard, like 1 to 2,000. The answer is 9. There were 9 unarmed Black guys killed by police last year. Following the post, and for that matter pre, which were more effective, Ferguson policing reforms, there were only 41 men of all colors that were unarmed killed by police last year, perhaps a couple of women as well. The total number of individuals who were shot by police, period, and this would include people running at an officer with a gun, was 1,004 in 2019 across the entire United States. The huge majority of them were non-Black. There were 229 African Americans that were shot. All of the rest would be Caucasian whites, or in most cases Caucasian Hispanics by definition. There might be a few in kind of an undocumented or undescribed category. But those are the actual facts on police violence. If you break down the number of unarmed brothers that were killed by cops of all colors last year, it's 9. And this extends into a large number of other areas when people try to talk about this graphic, hidden bigotry that's out there somewhere. One of the things I find in my research is that claims of institutional racism almost always disappear if you adjust for literally any variable but race. So to give an example of what I mean by that, 20 years ago or more, the liberal government economist June O'Neill and the conservative gadfly researcher Dinesh D'Souza decided to look at black versus white income. Because at the time, black incomes were only 82% of white incomes. There's been a slight closing of that gap. And the obvious attribution, the obvious thing that this was attributed to was racism. What they found instead was that, sure, there is some racism, but there's also affirmative action. Those in many cases balance one another out. And what affected these incomes were variables other than race. So one was age. When that had a huge effect. The most common age for an African-American person, you can check this out, is 27. This is Pew Research. For a white, the most common age, in fact, the modal average age, is 58. That's a 31-year gap. Obviously, you're going to make more money as a 58-year-old senior executive than if you're 27. Another variable that had a huge impact was residency, north versus south. Whites and blacks in many southern states like Mississippi, you don't want to jokingly crack and say everybody's poor, but make nearly the same incomes. But those incomes are both going to be lower than anybody's income in New York City. That was another variable. What about years? Not quality, just years of education. Do you go through and get that sheepskin in a working class school where either a white or black guy could graduate with effort? If you adjust for those three things, and I believe SAT score, the black-white income gap vanished. It was down to 2 or 3%, and that probably is real racism. But every time you take on one of these theories of massive racism, are they just murdering brothers in the street, you're going to find that the answer is almost certainly no. There's no way that would be tolerated in the modern USA. However much may occur at the margins, however much may occur illegally, racism has been illegal since the Civil Rights Act in 1964, or better say, discrimination. So I don't think that there's a great deal of institutional racism whatsoever. I think instead what you have is people identifying the irritations and quirks of everyday life as prejudice and freaking out about them. People that have almost been trained to feel oppressed are very common in the college environment. By no means just among blacks, among my group, by the way, among feminist students, now among young whites pulled to the hard right. Even fat people have started lobbying to be recognized as an oppressed group. But this kind of pure fragility is a bad thing for a warrior society or for a society of thinkers, or however you prefer to think of we Americans.
Yeah, but it's something that is very, very sticky in the minds of millions of people. So, I mean, you know as well as I do that storytelling is the underpinning of human thought. I mean, people are not really driven creatures. So how do you begin to deal with the fact that, I mean, people still believe that the Titanic sank with that dramatic vertical drop that it does in the movie Titanic. That didn't happen. Based on the evidence that we know, it was a much less dramatic fall. But if you ask people, they saw it in that story, and it's emotionally ingrained that Jack and those guys, you know, they plummeted straight down vertical. How do you overcome that story that people feel that it's a racial war out?
I think you have to tell your own story. And, for example, I'm a member of the 1776 Project, which is the black business and social scientific community's response, or at least the center-to-right portion of that community, although we're obviously nonpartisan, but response to the claims of the quote-unquote 1619 Project, many of which verged on the nonsensical. The Revolutionary War was fought to keep slavery in place and that kind of thing. And to tell our story, we're not just saying, no, statistically that's wrong. I mean, we're creating a classroom curriculum that dramatizes the black and white ally, the heroes of the past, the people that succeeded despite prejudice that existed throughout history. I mean, Robert Smalls, for example, who stole a Confederate warship and sailed it to the USA. And we're making the point that, for example, hard work, intelligence, sacrifice, those are the things that bring success with these wonderful stories. Teach some of the black myths alongside the Iliad. So you have to come up with a counter-narrative to the whinging and whining and complaining, but when you do, I think it'll probably win. Yeah, love talking to you, and hope to again soon, man.
Your home time for news, talk, and information. 1040 WHBO Pinellas Park, Tampa Bay's all new News Talk 1040.
It's the only way I get news.
Special report, protests across America. Protests continue as prosecutors elevated the charge against a fired Minneapolis police officer accused in the death of George Floyd.
I filed an amended complaint that charges former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin with murder in the second degree for the death of George Floyd.